Sandre here. This is going to be a video response to Sargon of Akkad regarding the issue of Venezuela and its economic nature. Now, let me just remind anyone who's watching that me and Sargon are actually friendly, so if you expect this video to spark any kind of drama, you're sadly mistaken. This is going to be a respectful response to him, where I will simply use historical facts to correct inaccuracies. Now let's begin. Venezuela is one of those nations that is very much misunderstood, and even the simplest amount of research will tell you a very different story than what I'm hearing from a lot of people on the internet. You see, Venezuela is not by any means socialist. Now, what I'm about to share with you regarding this topic isn't my opinion. What I'm gonna share with you are historical facts. What the actual regime under Hugo Chavez actually did ever since he took power. These are their actions. If you want to turn this discussion into semantics, let me just tell you already, I have no patience for that. I look at actions, not words. So the question is, does Venezuela have a socialist economy? Well, the answer is pretty simple. No. There is a special dynamic of capital accumulation, which still drives the economic activity. And enterprises are majority privately owned, and they do seek profit. Venezuela also operates very well in a global capitalist market system, unlike Cuba, for instance. You see, Cuba actually does have economic socialism, so that is a nation that you could look to if you want to criticize socialism. But Venezuela simply isn't. Now, that being said, does Venezuela have regulations? Well, I don't want to be snarky, but duh. But there is no new system that has been erected to replace capitalism. Venezuela is simply just a pretty normal mixed economy. Now I'm gonna go through different years and show you the actual policies of Venezuela to show you that it is not a so-called socialist nation at all. Let's begin in 2007. In evaluating government policy with respect to poverty, it is also worth noting that sharp spike in the poverty rate at the end of 2001, 39%, to its peak of 55.1% in the second half of 2003 is overwhelmingly attributable to the opposition oil strike of 2002 and 2003. There is little doubt that poverty would have been even lower today if it had not been for the enormous economic damage caused by this strike. Unemployment has also dropped sharply during the current economic recovery. As can be seen in Table 4, the unemployment rate has fallen from 18.4% in June 2003 to 8.3% in June 2007, its lowest level in more than a decade. If we compare to the beginning of the Chavez administration, unemployment stood at 15% in June 1999. By any comparison, the official unemployment rate has dropped sharply. Of course, an unemployment rate of 8.3% in Venezuela, as in developing economics generally, is not comparable to the same rate in the United States or Europe. Many of the people counted as are very much underemployed, but the measure is consistent over time, and therefore shows a considerable improvement in the labor market. This can be seen in other labor market indicators. For example, employment in the formal sector has increased to 6.06 million in 2006, from 4.41 million in 1998, and 4.72 million in 2003. As a percentage of the labor force, formal employment has increased significantly since 1998, from 44.5 to 49.4%. As can be seen in Table 4, there has been an increase of about 1.9 million jobs in the private sector and 478,000 jobs in the public sector since 1998. Employment as a percentage of the labor force has increased by 1.5 percentage points since 1998. Private employment was a slightly larger percentage of the labor force, 75.2% in 2006, as compared to 1998, 74.9%. However, both of these indicators probably understate improvement in the labor market, since the number of people who were out of the labor force for education, as access to education was increasing, rose by 3.4 percentage points relative to the labor force during this period. And as one can see from this table of 2007, the private sector is indeed the biggest employer, by far. Now I'm gonna jump to 2010 and show you the development 3 years later in Venezuela. Since 2007, Chavez has nationalized and expropriated companies in sectors he deemed strategic, including the oil industry, cement, telecommunication, electricity, steel, and food. But economists note that those businesses make up a relatively modest share of the economy, and the balance between public and private sectors remains nearly identical to when Chavez took office, in part because the private sector grew faster than the government between 2003 and 2006, when the economy was booming. Last year, the private sector accounted for 70% of gross domestic product, including 11% in taxes paid on products according to central bank estimates. The public sector was 30%, a slightly smaller share than when Chavez was elected in 2008. Now let's jump 2 years into the future, to 2012, and take a look at how much socialism was in Venezuela at that point. The state-owned PDVSA, with revenues of $124.4 billion in 2012, is the world's 5th largest oil company, according to a recent ranking of the world's top companies. Contrary to popular perceptions, it was not former President Hugo Chavez who nationalized the oil industry, but former President Carlos Andres Perez in 1976. Like President Morales of Bolivia in 2005, Chavez merely changed the terms of the contracts of 16 of the 18 international oil companies, IOCs, that were involved in producing the remaining 30% of the country's output. In 2009, the country took control of 80 crude oil service companies. In addition, Corporación Venezolana de Guyana Minerven, the government-owned mineral and industrial producer, which is an affiliate of PDVSA, manages the state's 32 operating service agreements, with IOCs and 8 risk and profit-sharing agreements that account for 20% of the country's oil production in 2011. Finally, Corporación Venezolana de Petróleos, a wholly owned subsidiary of PDVSA, also managed 4 OSAs that produced and processed extra heavy crude oil and accounted for about 10% of production. In 2006, former President Hugo Chavez mandated a renegotiation of a minimum 60% PDVSA share in all joint ventures, including OSAs. Eventually, 16 of the OSAs, including Chevron and Shell, complied with the new agreements, while Total and Eni were forcibly taken over. On a see-through basis, after stripping out private shareholders, the state share of the 30% of production by joint ventures is 18%. Even when it comes to health insurance in Venezuela, there are private options. According to some estimates, 1 in 5 Venezuelans actually have private insurance instead of government insurance. Now, how about we collect all the data we've gone through? We have gathered that the Venezuelan percentage of public ownership is somewhere between 30 to 40%. France, by the same estimate, is about 40%. Cuba, on the other hand, is somewhere around 75%. There is no justification for calling Venezuela socialist by any stretch of the imagination, because even France is most likely more socialist than Venezuela. Before you go, I would like to remind you though that I do have other platforms as well. You can watch my videos on BitChute and VidMe as well. I also have social media accounts on Twitter, Facebook, and Minds. I suggest you follow me on as many platforms as possible, just to make sure that you really are updated when I make new content. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!